Hey everybody, Mr. Militich here. This is the first lecture, official lecture, and slides paired for our starting of our distance learning. We are going to start off with doing a review of Unit 6, which was all the judicial branch stuff that we talked about for the past, it was about, 2 months or so. We had just finished Unit 6 that week. We were getting into the other stuff, the constitutional stuff, just before we left. So we're going to start by reviewing Unit 6. These slides are specifically for reviewing criminal law versus civil law. We'll get into that in a moment. But later in the week, we may review other concepts from Unit 6 based off of the data that me and Mr. Salami gather from our pretest that we assigned. Hopefully you did it already. If not, I'll give you a chance to do that in just a moment. But we will use the data that we gather in that pretest to try to focus our discussion session on Thursday. I hope everybody had a wonderful Easter break. Hope everyone had a wonderful Passover for those who celebrate, or just in general had a relaxing spring break away from schoolwork and are now ready to jump back in for quarter four and start the wonderful work again of learning about our government. So let's go ahead and jump in and get started. So our agenda for this lesson is going to be a quick check-in from me. You should already have, we should know about what's been going on in my life because I gave you that check-in with the welcome back slides, but I'll do a really quick check-in. We're going to go over what this week is going to look like. Then we are going to give you a time to talk about that pretest assignment, which was your first assignment for this week. Then we'll get into the differences of criminal and civil law, and we'll discuss your post-lesson reflection assignment. So that is our agenda for these slides. It's going to be a little bit of a longer lecture today, and I have incorporated a break into the lecture. So at that time, you could take a break if you wanted to pause, go do something else for a half hour, come back to this. You are welcome to do so. So these slides should be done in chunks if you feel like it's a bit too much. It's totally fine. So a check-in with me. I promise you to give you some more pictures from my Animal Crossing village. So I have done just that. This is me sitting in my little Zen garden that I have created. I have some bamboo, a little bamboo fountain, a little nice Zen pond, some garden benches to enjoy the scenery. This is me in my little field of flowers. Notice the cool hybrid pink flowers. For those of you who play Animal Crossing, you know those take some effort to get. This is inside the museum. This is my aquarium of all the different fish I've caught. It's pretty decked out, pretty nice. And of course, a little public fountain area right near my town hall. So that's some of the stuff I've been doing in my free time. But hopefully you guys have been doing some fun stuff, and I would love to see some stuff that you've been doing over this break due to the coronavirus. So if you have any things you'd like to share with the class or anything to share with me, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to see it. Okay, so the weekly overview. We are going to review some Unit 6 topics. So we are going to talk about the pretest, criminal versus civil law lecture. That's what's happening right now. We have our discussion on Thursday, and we have the lesson reflection, which is another assignment. So again, to specify the assignments, first assignment this week is the pretest in Google Forms and the lesson reflection. So for the reflection, remember in the welcome back video, I had mentioned that your reflection assignment can often be done in two different ways. You can either attend the discussion and be prepared to that, and if you speak, then you will get credit for that. Or you can actually do the reflection assignment that will be posted in Google Classroom. And I believe by the time you're viewing this video, the assignment should be posted up in Google Classroom. So I made a decision about Thursday's discussions. I'm going to have two different sections. So honors, you will be discussing with all my other honors sections. So that'll be periods 1, 2, and 5. You will be discussing on Thursday, 11 to 11:45. So I found this cool little fancy mouse tool to use during this. So honors, you will be 11 to 11:45 on Thursdays. That is the time you will sign in to a Google Meet. I will publish a link for you to follow, and then we can discuss the week's material in that discussion. And comprehensive sections, so that'd be periods 6, 7, and 8. My comprehensive sections, you will be going 12:15 to 1 o'clock. That'll be Thursdays, 12:15 to 1 o'clock. That will be the time you will sign in, and I will send you a link. You will sign in to discuss the material if you are available to discuss. Remember, the discussions are optional. You do not have to do them, but they're an easy way to fulfill that reflection assignment if you are available at that time. Okay, so the pretest. If you have not done the pretest yet, stop. Go back to Google Classroom. Find the link to the pretest Google form that I posted in Google Classroom. And please complete it. This is your first week assignment, and I will give you the time to complete that now. So go ahead and pause this video, and I will see you back in just a moment. So, if you hopefully you've done the pretest now, you pause the video and you now are coming back, and we are now going to discuss criminal versus civil law. This is the big concept that a lot of us may have struggled with on the unit test, and I'm kind of restructured the slides and hopefully approach it in a different way that'll make a lot more sense to other people who may have not have understood it. So most of these slides are going to be half and half. All right, we're going to have criminal law here on the left side, civil law here on the right side. The two concepts are very similar, so hopefully seeing them side by side will give you a better understanding of some of the similarities and differences of both criminal law and civil law. So, criminal law, right? The basic purpose of criminal law is that it deals with crimes that are against the public or public well-being. I know this isn't the most clear definition, but it's the kind of simplest way that I can put it to define what is a crime, based off of, or rather, instead of what you would sue someone over. If you were ever suing someone for a wrongdoing, that happens in civil law. But in criminal law, it is considered a crime against the public, and that is why the government is always involved in a criminal offense. So these are things that we want to prevent from happening to anybody ever. So the crimes you can think of, theft, robbery, assault, murder, these are things that we don't ever want to happen in our society ever. And so those are considered crimes against the government, against the public, against society. And so that's what's considered a criminal offense. However, in civil law bases itself off of conflicts between one person and another or a business. Now, it could be more than one person on either side, but basically, if there's ever a conflict or a dispute, that's what civil law tries to help out and figure out. Again, these are disputes that can happen normally, and that the courts act as experts to try to resolve the issue. So it may not have been anything criminal, but a situation could have wound up where one person is harmed because of the actions of another person, and that person can sue. Remember, that was one of our vocabulary words. They can sue, meaning they can bring a lawsuit to a civil court and go through civil law and see if the dispute can be resolved. So again, if we're using some office references, civil law would be like an argument or a disagreement between Dwight and Jim, with Michael trying to intervene. He would be like the judge. Right, that would be, something that naturally occurs, or, a dispute between who stole what, or this person hurt me, and so I want money. That would be civil law. However, criminal law would be like when Michael hits Meredith with his car. We don't ever want someone to be hit by a car. We want everybody to be paying attention, not speeding, not endangering the public. And so that's why this instance would be more of a criminal act, because even though Meredith is the only one getting hit by a car, we don't want anybody to ever be hit by a car. So that's why that would be a criminal offense, because striking someone with your car is a crime against the public at large and the public and humanity. Because again, we don't want this to ever happen. So moving on to criminal law and civil law issues, right? So things that would fall under criminal law are things like vandalism, right? Vandalism is when you intentionally destroy or alter or harm another person's property. Right? Illegal drug use, theft, assault, murder. These are all things that we don't ever want to happen in society ever. We don't think it's ever appropriate for any of these things to happen. And so that's why these fall under a criminal offense. They are crimes against the public and the government. Now, civil law, again, these are issues that are disputes that the courts try to help resolve. They're not necessarily criminal. Civil cases, they understand that these things may happen, and so civil law tries to rectify or solve disputes that happen in this way. So marriage and divorce, that happens in civil law courts. Adoption and child custody, right, that happens in civil courts. Individual hurts. So what do I mean by this? Individual hurts are criminal acts that can also have a civil law equivalent. So if something happens to you, say somebody steals something from you, right? We don't ever want theft to happen, so that person can get brought up on criminal charges. But you can also go around and sue that person in civil court. So the results. Right. In criminal law, if you are found guilty, you can incur fines, which is money that you pay to the government. And it results in jail time. So you can in a lot of criminal law cases, not all, but in a lot of instances, you can be brought to jail, meaning you are incarcerated by the government for a certain amount of time. You're not allowed to leave. And it's considered a rehabilitation, meaning you have to be away from society for a while and then come back. Now, there's a lot of controversy about whether our criminal law practices here in America are actually for rehabilitation, but that's a whole nother discussion for another day. Now, a major difference in civil law is that the only result in civil law is damages. So damages is money paid to the injured party. So again, the courts can either force you to pay money, or they could force you to try to rectify the action. Say you stole something and you still had it, they can order you to return the item. But in general, the result of civil law is damages, and that's money paid to the quote-unquote injured party, meaning the party who was injured by the act of the person who was found guilty. Now, this is a huge important difference to make, because in criminal law, it's only in criminal law that can result in jail time, because that's where the government is involved. The government is really only involved in criminal law, unless you're suing the government, which is a whole other story. But the government brings charges in a criminal law, and that's why it can result in jail time. Every case, just like the one in our mock trial, it's always the person who's being accused of the crime versus the government or the people. Right, because the government represents society, the state society, or the national society at large. So I'd like to present with you a little scenario that can kind of show you how the same offense, the same action, can be tried in a criminal court and a civil court, right? Two different cases all revolving around the same act. So let's refer back to that office example I gave earlier with Michael hitting Meredith with his car. So the criminal case of that would be, Michael hits Meredith with his car. That'd be the actual incident, right? Meredith would then call the cops, and Michael would be arrested. So then Michael would go to court as the defendant and would have to defend himself against the government. Now, Meredith could be called as a witness to kind of give testimony that she was the one hit because she was the victim. But otherwise, Meredith would not really be involved in the case. The case would be Michael Scott versus the people of Pennsylvania, because they live in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So if Michael were to lose, he would go to jail, right? That would be the result of that criminal trial. He may have to pay a fine, but most likely he would just go to jail for the crime of actually hitting Meredith with his car. Now, that fine would be paid to the government. It would not be paid to Meredith, because remember, these criminal acts are considered crimes against the people, against society. And so you are trying to make up the fact that you committed a crime to society back to the people of the government, or the people of Pennsylvania in this case. Now, because Meredith was hit with his car, she has, been personally affected by this crime. And Michael going to jail may give her some, a sense of that justice has been done, but it wouldn't help her with the fact that she would now have to pay for all these medical bills, that she would probably miss work, and she did miss work if you watched The Office. So she could sue Michael to try to make her life a little easier from the fact that the harm that he caused her had an impact on her life. So she would then go to civil law for that same action. This would be a separate trial, the same action. So Michael hits Meredith with his car. So Meredith can now sue Michael for injuring her, right? This would fall under intentional tort, that aspect of civil law. And then they would go to court. So Meredith, the plaintiff in this case, Meredith would be the plaintiff because she is bringing the charges that Michael has hit her with his car to the court, and Michael would be the defendant. He is the one defending against these charges. Now, if they had video of it, because they would, because it's like a mockumentary, so there's video evidence, so Michael would probably lose. And, Meredith would first tell the court with the lawsuit that she wants a certain amount of money that Michael should pay her in order to resolve this issue. So let's just say in this case, Meredith would ask for $100,000 for the fact that she has to cover her medical bills now, and from lost wages, meaning that she wasn't able to go to work, so she wasn't getting paid. So if Michael was found liable, meaning guilty, in a civil case, if Michael was found liable, then he would pay Meredith $100,000 to her if he lost. Now, he wouldn't go to jail because of the civil trial. He would just have to pay money. So again, this is the same instance of Michael hitting Meredith, but two different trials. These would be two different judges. These would be two different sets of juries. These would be two different sets of attorneys, right? One representing the government in the criminal case. And Meredith would have to hire lawyers to represent her in the civil case. And then Michael would have a lawyer for the criminal case and the civil case. Sometimes they can be the same. Sometimes they can be different. So I highlight this because we're going to be reading about a similar case like this that actually happened in real life, right? The very famous case with O.J. Simpson, right? He went to criminal trial first for the alleged murder of his girlfriend and her friend. And then he also went to civil court because the families of the victims sued him for wrongful death. Okay, so that was a lot of information to take in. So now would be a perfect time to take a break, take some notes, maybe go back in the lecture and review some of the material that we talked about. So go ahead and take a break, and then I will resume this recording in just a moment. So enjoy your break. Okay, we are back. Hopefully you had a wonderful break time, and I'm going to go ahead and continue on with the lecture. So, in a trial, when we talk about the people, right, there are many of the same people that happen in both a criminal trial and a civil trial. So first I'm going to talk about what things are the same, and then I'll talk about what things are different. If you see these little banners are different. So, in a criminal trial and civil trial, you have a judge. A judge is the person who moderates the trial. If you remember the mock trial, that was like me sitting up there at the front of the room in the black robe. That's what a judge does. They make sure that everybody's following the rules of the court, making sure that everybody gets a fair trial, both sides of the case. Then we have the defendant. The defendant is the person being accused of the wrongdoing in both criminal and civil law. So in criminal law, the defendant would be the person who committed the crime, while in civil law, the defendant would be the person who's being accused of doing something wrong, and that person wants money from that person. And of course, you have the jury. The jury happens in both a criminal and civil trial, and they are the group of people brought together by the government to judge the defendant. or judge the evidence being presented in the trial to see whose argument is more convincing. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. The people that are different are the prosecutor. So the prosecutor is only in a criminal trial. The prosecutor is the lawyer who represents the government, because it is the government who brings the case to a criminal law court. And what do I mean by bring the case? I'm talking about they're the one who filed charges. They work with the police to arrest the defendant. And they're the ones who represent the people and the government against the person who committed the crime. Because remember, the purpose of criminal law revolves all around crimes and issues that affect the entire public. Remember, the defendant in this case would be accused of doing something that we never want to happen in society ever. While in a civil trial, we have a different person sitting in the courtroom. That person is called the plaintiff. So in a civil trial, you would have the plaintiff versus the defendant. The plaintiff is the person who is accusing someone of doing a wrong against them. So they're the ones who bring the case to court. They're the one who file the paperwork. They bring in the defendant. They issue. They get the court to issue them a subpoena or a summons to bring to court. And so in a civil trial, the plaintiff is the one who's saying, this person did wrong to me, and this is the money I want from them. So in the civil trial, you have a plaintiff, while in a criminal trial, you have the prosecutor. Right? Those are two very important distinctions. So again, to say it in a different way, you do not have a prosecutor in a civil case, and you do not have a plaintiff in a criminal case. They're very specific to the type of law. Okay, so this brings me now to probably the most important term that I wanted to go over because I realized when looking back at my slides, I didn't have a slide with this specific definition. And I think that's why the terms of preponderance of the evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt may have been a little confusing. So if we take away anything from this lecture, it should be this definition here: standards of proof. So in a trial, I'll try to make I'll move the screen here for now. So in any trial, the standard of proof is the legal term. That means that the standard of proof, that is the level of certainty and the amount of evidence necessary for a jury to find a defendant guilty at a trial. So think of this as the bar that has to be met in a trial. And whether it's criminal or civil law, the standard is different. But it's important to understand that when we talk about the two terms that are coming next, they fall under this umbrella as types of standards of proof, meaning that is the bar, that is the level of evidence that the lawyers have to convince the jury of before they can find someone guilty at a trial. Right, so I just said this: criminal and civil trials have different standards of proof, and we're going to go into that in the next slide. So criminal law, this term should hopefully be familiar. In criminal law, the term is beyond a reasonable doubt. This is the standard of proof for criminal law, beyond a reasonable doubt. Meaning that the evidence presented to the jury must convince the jury that someone has committed that crime with like 98% certainty, that there is no understandable doubt that you can think of that the person didn't commit the crime. If you do have any doubt that the person did commit the crime, then as a jury, you're supposed to find that person not guilty. However, if the evidence presented to you by the government shows that this person really did commit the crime and there's no conceivable way, given the evidence and the testimonies that have been given, that the person didn't commit the crime, then you would have passed this level, this standard, this bar of beyond a reasonable doubt. Then you could find the person guilty. So it's a really, really, really high bar to meet. While in civil law, Civil law, that standard of proof is called preponderance of the evidence. Now, this is just a really big fancy term to mean the jury picks whichever side, the plaintiff or the defendant, has the more convincing argument. Right? Different states have different numbers of jurors that have to vote for one side or the other to find the person guilty. But essentially, the jury can just listen to the evidence in a civil trial and say, you know what? The plaintiff made a really convincing argument. That person should owe them money. Or a jury could say, well, I was more convinced by the evidence presented by the defendant. So I don't think the defendant should pay that person money. Right? So really, it's just you pick whoever's more convincing. However, that's a very different standard than in criminal law, which is you have to be 98% certain. So it has to be super, super convincing. So again, standards of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the higher standard because it could result in someone going to jail. So a jury has to be super, super, super certain that that person committed a crime before the government essentially takes away an individual's rights and liberties and puts them in jail. So that's the standard that our system is based off of, right? That it's very, very high, and a jury has to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that that person committed a crime. So in civil law, preponderance of the evidence, the standard is lower. The standard is lower because it's typically only about money. Now, giving money to someone, especially a large sum of money, can be very difficult on a defendant. Money is often the lifeblood of how we exist in society. So it's still a heavy burden to bear if you have to give someone, $20, $30, $40, $100,000. But criminal law will always be higher because we are talking about removing someone's liberties and freedoms and putting them in jail, taking them out of society, essentially. So the criminal law, beyond a reasonable doubt standard, will always be the higher standard. So that's basically the main differences that I wanted to go over. Hopefully things make a little bit more sense about the differences between criminal law and civil law. And in Google Classroom, I posted a reflection assignment. Now, again, you have several options to earn this credit. You can either attend the discussion on Thursday, or you can complete the written assignment in Google Classroom. You only have to do one or the other. So if you attend the discussion, I'm going to ask you to do some of the same activities that you would do writing the activity, which is just reading an article, and I'll go over that in the next slide. And if you're available to just discuss the material with us, I'll take a note of who's attending and who's actively participating, and they will get the credit. While if you are unable to attend the session or would rather not attend a live discussion, then you can simply just do the written assignments in Google Classroom. So, in closing, the discussion times that I wanted to remind you of, the discussion times for Thursday, the day our class is technically held, will be honors 11 o'clock to 11:45 and comprehensive 12:15 to 1 p.m. So we probably won't take the full 45 minutes, but I do have that 45 minutes blocked off. So if we end early, then we end early. Otherwise, it will be a hard stop at each of these times of 11:45 and 1 o'clock, just to honor the time that you are committing to class. So if you are attending the discussion, please review these notes and the posted article before attending the discussion. The article will be posted in the reflection assignment in Google Classroom. So if you don't want to do the writing and you want to attend the discussion, please at least read the article. And to get participation points, I'll be asking for you to be able to intelligibly refer back to the article. Otherwise, keep calm and keep washing your hands. I hope you guys enjoyed our first video. Hopefully these videos will get better and better as I keep working with the software and get more used to this sort of delivery of teaching. But I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you all on Thursday. Have a great week, y'all.